So ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me okay with this microphone, etc.? Oh, I've got to stand over there where the camera is. That makes a good. That's a good one. Right here. Okay.
It's not Joe Biden.
Okay. Right, ladies and hope not. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Adam Taylor, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for everyone turning up to come and have a look at this presentation. I must admit, looking around the room, you are all immaculately turned out, and I do feel a little bit underdressed. So do forgive me. So my name's Adam Taylor, and I have explored the Medway Estuary with my dear friends for the last 15 years. And there is not an area, there's not a mud bank, sand bank, creek, salt marsh or island that we do not know. And this presentation is basically showing you the best of what is on the Medway Estuary, so that you don't necessarily have to go there. I wasn't meant to get a laugh, but I'll take it. So the point is also that if you do want to go to the Medway Estuary or visit some of these islands, I would caveat this presentation by saying you must get the express permission of the landowner, and if you do go, then you'd go at the least impactful time for the birds, because the entire estuary is a protected area for bird life. It's very, very important internationally, and the least impactful time is around kind of September, late August, September. So now we've done the caveat, we shall move on with the presentation. So, where is the Medway Estuary, you may ask? So this is London, this is where we are now, obviously, and then you've got the Thames running through here, and then you've got the Medway Estuary down here. Hopefully, can you see that? Yeah. So let's zoom in. The wonders of Google Earth. So Medway Estuary. This is the river here. You got Sheerness up here, and the Isle of Grain there. That's got lots of. It's got a refinery, LNG refinery as well, and there's Thames Port, which is like a container port. They call it Energy Island. Although that's a bit of it's not, we don't call it Energy Island locally. But the main point being is you've got Chatham Dockyard down here, and then you've got Rochester, that some of you may be familiar with, obviously Charles Dickens. If you've ever been to Rochester, it's a fantastic place. The High Street is about one postcard away from becoming a theme park for Dickens. But Chatham Dockyard was the centre of the Medway towns. It was a military-industrial complex for about 500 years. It was one of the most important naval dockyards in the entire country, and some of these islands would have various military installations on those islands to protect the dockyard. So let's move on. There are my friends on our open water in our canoes, as it were. Over here you've got the nodding donkeys of the Thames Port. That isn't in the Thames, it's actually in Medway, and then you've got Grain Power Station. So that chimney is no longer there. It was demolished a few years ago, so these photographs are quite old. These photographs are mostly from my time when I went about 5 or 6 years ago. We don't tend to go out to those islands now, certainly not without permission. So first, let's look at the locations we're going to go to. So first of all, we're going to go to Who Island. So it's a kidney-shaped island. Then we're going to zoom over to a place called Marsh. And then we're going to go over to one of my favourites, which is Darnet Island. There's a fort on Darnet Island. And then we're going to zoom over to the eastern side of the estuary towards Sheerness, and this is called Burntwick Island. And then we're going to zoom over to the north side of the estuary to the World War I German submarine wreck. But first of all, we're going to go to Who Island. So just as a reminder, this is London. We're going to zoom in on Who Island. So, Who Island is a kidney-shaped island. So let's do this. So you've got the forts down here, it's a Victorian fort, and then you've got a bit of salt marsh going on here, and then this whole area is kidney-shaped, and you've got these crisscross lines. It's very high, and it's very big. It's by far one of the biggest islands in the Medway Estuary. It will probably take you about a good hour to walk all the way around it. And we will look at another map. So Who Island in map. So this is a map from 1842. And in this map here, you've got Who Salt Marsh. It's marked as Who Salt Marsh on the map. You will not see Who Island written on any maps in the local area. It's always written down as Who Salt Marsh. But everyone locally knows it as Who Island. So back in 1842, this was a collection of small marshy islets yet to be joined up. And next door here on this Ordnance Survey map is the whole blank area, Royal Dockyard, and it's blank for obvious reasons. They don't want the enemy to know what the military establishment looks like. So just down here, this is Bullnose Point, and this was the main entrance to the dockyard. So we had 3 massive great big basins for some of the finest ships of the Royal Navy that came in here. And then this area all the way along the front here is where the dredging happened. So they had to keep this constantly dredging, almost 24/7 for the next 150 years, to make sure that we could get our big shiny battleships in and out of the dockyard. So over time, when you're dredging that amount of sediment almost on a daily basis, you need to put it somewhere very convenient. So you put it on Who's Salt Marsh. So over time, the salt marsh gradually joins together, fantastic, amazing naval engineers to make that happen, and it ends up looking like this. So this is 2023. So as you can see, it's one big solid mass as an island. And it's also very high. And over here, St Mary's Island, this is where the dockyard would have partly been, and also you've got 3 big basins here, and there's the Bullnose, the entrance there. St Mary's Island now is a housing estate, it's very nice. It's got lovely views of the Medway, and the basins, obviously we don't have any battleships there now, but there is a marina. So we move on. So Who Island in photos. So this is Who Fort. This is a round fort. It was built started work in 1861. It was finished in 1871. Took 10 years to build, and it was an absolute nightmare to build because you're building it on marshy land. This particular fort, along with about another 4 forts in the area, cost the equivalent of £2 billion in today's money. These forts were built as a result of a royal commission in 1851. 1851. The Royal Commission was looking at all of our important ports and dockyards, and they realised that they were woefully defended. So they embarked on a massive building project all the way around all the major dockyards in the country, and they built lots of these forts all over the place. So Portsmouth is a very good example. There's something stupid like 10 forts around Portsmouth docks. So this fort particularly was originally designed to have 2 floors of guns and then a magazine floor at the base. And as they started to build it, the cracks started to appear in the foundations, and then they actually had to redesign the entire fort. So they reduced it from 2 tiers down to 1 tier, and actually spread it out. So it's basically spread the weight out on the marshland, so it reduced the amount of weight on the marshes. It's a bit like a jammy dodger biscuit. So you've got 2 bits of biscuit, and then in the middle where the jam is, that is your parade ground, and then underneath that are the water tanks for the fort. So on the inside here, on the lower part, there's a walkway that goes round. Then you've got the parade ground, and this is where the guns stick out, or the sally ports. So I went to the National Archives to do research on this. This is a painting, I should say. It's a drawing by the Royal Engineers. These are the people that built these forts. There's a massive big flagpole here. That gives you an idea of what it would have looked like. And then we move on to the floor plan of the fort. So this is the lower part of the fort. This is where the magazines are and where the accommodation is for the troops. And then this is the gun floor. This is the second floor. These are beautiful works of art, these drawings in themselves. So I'm going to take a closer look. We're going to show you this. So this is the lower level. There's 9 men would be billeted here. You've got the ablutions room, then you've got the latrines, and then you've got the cookhouse, and then just here, you've got a boiler. So a boiler in 1871 in a fort, a military establishment, was cutting edge. You didn't really get that. You didn't get that in most houses, let alone a fort with soldiers. The fort was never used in anger. It never really saw any serious action. By the time it was built, it was militarily obsolete. There was a battle that happened in the American Civil War in about 1860 something, and essentially what happened was there was a fort of similar design, and it was absolutely pulverised by modern shells. So they basically created shells that when they were fired from a cannon, they spun, they picked up velocity and reduced it to rubble. So by the time it was finished, militarily obsolete, but it did act as a deterrent. So we take another look at what the guns would have looked like. So these were naval guns. These are 12-inch RML guns, rifle muzzle loading guns, absolutely huge gun, naval guns. You've got the rail at the back here and the rail at the front there, so you would have had an angle of fire of about 130 degrees within a much bigger circle of 360 degrees. So it had a very formidable line of fire. And then what you also have here is there are these rings in the ceiling. And basically you would have had like a cable system, a glorified curtain arrangement, if you will. So you had these curtains here that were steel curtains called mantlets. And the reason why these curtains were here was because they would be drawn around the gun so it would prevent any snipers trying to take out the actual soldiers. So we move on. So this gives you an idea of the amount of engineering that went into building these forts. So this is not actually Who Fort, this is a fort down in Portsmouth. But as you can see, you've got a trebuchet arrangement to get the gun into the actual fort. So it's quite a big operation. And now we go into Who Fort. Again, I would stress that if you want to go to these islands, then you must get permission of the landowner. At the time, we did. This was taken about 10 years ago, I must hasten to add. So essentially what's going on here, obviously it's very overgrown, it's a dry moat. It was always designed to be a dry moat, so it would be kind of like a kill zone for any soldiers that were trying to attack. And it was also a dry moat because the embankment around it acted as a flood defence on very, very high tides, because you're obviously on quite a low marsh. So we're going to go down here into the entrance. So we're on the other side of the main entrance. These are the main gates here. They're the original gates. As you can see, there's the rotting of the bottom of the gates where there's been various fluctuations in the water table around the fort. Most of the time, the water is around the base of your feet, and in winter time it can sometimes be above your feet, or in extreme cases is up to your knees. So we move on. So we're in the walkway and the bottom of the Jammy Dodger biscuit. And in this walkway, we're walking round it. So this is the ablutions room and the cookhouse and the boiler that I showed you on the plan earlier. And then you've got the officers' toilets just here. As you can see, it's in an advanced state of dereliction. So we're in the same position, and we're turning round and we're looking up. So what we're seeing here is you've got these bridges that link from the casements, where the guns are, into the centre where the parade ground is. And this is the business end of the fort, so this is where the guns are. So this is the gun floor. So essentially here you've got the rail, the forward rail that I showed you on the photograph of the gun, and the back rail would have been around here. All of this area would have been York stone, but it was all nicked in the 1950s. So here you have a glorified doorstop, so there would have been massive, great big oak doors in between each of the casements. The idea of that was that if there was a direct hit, then it would reduce the amount of people that were going to be killed on the next gun. It would also reduce the amount of smoke as well. Just here you've got the ammunition shaft down to the lower level. Then here you've got these hoops in the ceiling, and that is for the mantlet that I was showing you earlier. So I'm taking you back to a picture of Who Island so that you get an idea of what's going on here. So here's the fort here. This is the salt marsh. And then this is the whole area that's quite high. So this is by far one of the highest islands in the Medway Estuary, but if you went down there and looked at it, you wouldn't actually think it was that high, because it's quite plateaued. So essentially what's going on here is when you've got an island that you're using for tons of sediment on a yearly basis, you need to be very methodical and efficient with it. So you found your site to put your sediment, and so to be very, very methodical, you build a small narrow gauge railway on the island. And so this is what they did. So here we've got our little railway, little train here trundling along. You've got the dredgers, which would take the dredging sediment and then put it into these hoppers. Have a look at another photograph here. So here's the hoppers. Here's a little train trundling along. Now, if mankind had done nothing to this particular island, it would be, the level of it would be right down here, because it would be a salt marsh. It would be very close. It'd be covered by water twice a day. But because mankind has been dumping dredging sediment from our glorious dockyard at Chatham for all these years, it's up here. That's the height of the actual island there. This was taken in about the late 1970s, and the dockyard closed in 1984, so it got a little bit higher. Here's another picture of the little train. So you've got the little hoppers there, and there we are trundling along to the dredgers there, and in the background that is where Chatham Dockyard is. And then you've got these huge, great big pipes that crisscross the island, so that when you're dumping your dredging sediment, you've obviously got a lot of water, and that needs to drain off. It was an incredibly accurate engineering feat that they created on this particular island. So we move on. That is Who Island. I should add on Who Island, the other thing was that after the after the dockyard closed, they moved out. The island was actually used for landfill from front gardens in London. So there was a contract with lots of London boroughs, so they would collect all this garden waste from front gardens, put it onto a big barge, sail it down to the Medway and distribute it on Hoo Island. So Hoo Island to this day, if you go past on a boat, you will see that there is lots and lots of pampas grass. It's almost a forest of it in the centre, and that's the seeds that's come from people's front gardens. Then in 2011, they used part of the island where you had the Olympic site being built. They used a lot of the soil from that and the spoil, and they distributed it around Hoo Island, and today it is a nature reserve. And it's owned by the local ports authority, which is called Peel Ports. So Nor Marsh. So we're zooming in on Nor Marsh. Here we are. So these images are taken at low tide. Hence, you've got this kind of grass. It's kind of like it's brain-looking, as it will. So Nor Marsh is a typical example of a salt marsh that has been inned. So inning was a practice that dates back to probably Roman times, but in the about the 1300s, around that time, this marsh was owned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so at the time, about 1300s, 1400s, wool was the backbone of the English economy. There was a lot of money in wool. So essentially what happened here, they inned this marsh. So inning is building an embankment all the way around the marsh. So you encase it, you pump out all the water, you let the rains come, you level it off, and then you grass seed it and you turn it into a freshwater marsh. And being the Church of England, they wanted to maximise their profits, so what they did was they did exactly that here. They inned Nor Marsh. They put a peasant family on there, a peasant shepherd and his family, and they watched the money roll in for the next 500 years. And that's essentially what has happened here. But it's breached now. It's all gone. It's all gone, beg pardon. So we'll move on. So Nor Marsh, this is a picture from, a map of 1842, same as we've got here, Hoo's Salt Marsh up here. And then basically Nor Marsh is there. And so when you've got when you've got sheep on your marsh, you don't necessarily want to be governed by the tides. You want to get your livestock off when you want to, not be too tide dependent. So what you do is you build a causeway. So there was a causeway that linked from Nor Marsh to the then pretty village of Gillingham. And then you put the pause for effect there, and then we have the farm put just there. Now the farmers lived there over like 500 years longer, and in 1937 it was effectively abandoned. So 1937 there was a farmer and his wife who lived there with his son, and it was a dark and stormy night. And it was touch and go with his wife because she was gravely ill. They didn't know if she was going to actually make it at all. But it was dark and stormy night. They could not get off the marsh because it was too rough. Luckily, she survived the morning, and they got her off the marsh. And at that point, the farmer said, "Right, that's it. I've had enough. This is just not worth it anymore." So they abandoned the marsh. It was owned by the Admiralty and leased, and they couldn't get anyone else to work on it. So essentially, the other problem with the marsh was that it was becoming too expensive to maintain the flood wall. So basically, it was cheaper just to let it all fall away. So that's what happened. So but luckily for us, the farmer's son had a camera. Now, to have a camera at that price point for a family in the 1930s was very rare, and to actually get hold of these photographs was even rarer. So we've got one photograph here. These are cows grazing on Nor Marsh. It is Nor Marsh. And then we have the other picture, which is even better, which is of the actual farmhouse that was on the marsh. So the farmhouse, this is the flood embankment just here. It's a two-storey house, and then you've got a boat going on here, and then you've got a barn, and then you've got a jetty going on there. So after it was abandoned, as I say, the river wall fell into disrepair. Now, my friends and I in our canoes, we used the power of modern technology, and we cross-referenced between Google Maps and the old maps, and we went to the actual site of where the farmhouse was. And this is all that remains, completely gone. So it's completely gone. The river wall has completely failed, as you can see, because nature is taking it back as a salt marsh. And then you've got the remains of the jetty just here. So we move on. Darnett Island, one of my favourites. So again, reference, here's London town. So there's Darnett Island. So it's a very, very small island, dominated by the fort that's on it. And nobody talk while I drink some water. Thank you. All very well behaved. Yes, sir.
I muted the sound because your clipper was making noise, so if you want to play anything, warn me first.
Okay. Right, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Clayton. Right, so Darnett Island. So this is a satellite image, as I say, we're at low tide. And Darnett Island is a place, again, you will not see it written down on any maps as Darnett Island. It's always referred to as Bishop's Marsh, or at best you'll have Darnett Ness. So Ness means headland. We move on. So, Darnett Island in photos. So this is obviously an aerial shot. We're at half tide here. This is Nor Marsh, where we've just been. And then down at Darnett Island, you can see the moat is filled with water. There are various theories as to why it's filled with water. I won't go into it because we could be here all night. But essentially, with the Jammy Dodger biscuit analogy, that sits on top of an even bigger concrete disc. Who Island was a nightmare to build, and this was next level uber nightmare to build. So basically, I had to double the depth of the cement and the concrete for the foundations, and so you've got the Jammy Dodger biscuit that sits on top of a glorified giant raft. And over time, that raft has moved with the marsh, and it's severed the drainage drainage pipes, and it's filled up the water. That is the best theory that I've come up with. Other people have other theories, but we're not going to go there just yet. So this island is it's the only island that's privately owned by an individual. A very nice guy. I was lucky enough to interview him for a book that I'm writing about these islands. And he's quite an eccentric chap.
Really?
Probably
eccentric.
Probably, maybe not here, but lovely guy, and he actually collects islands. So he collects on.
Call it eccentric.
Exactly. So
Has he got now?
so I'm getting to that. Grayson. So essentially, he owns this island. He did own Thorney Island, which is in North Wales. It's a massive, great cliff island, a huge fort on it as well. He owned a couple of islands in Norway and Sweden, and he also owned one in Japan. But he sold them all off, and he just has this particular island. And I did say to him, "Why is it that you bought Darnett Island?" And he said, "Because it was there." So we move on. So this is the moat that's flooded. As you can see, this is the main entrance to the fort here, and then you've got this rickety old bridge going on there. So we move on to another picture. So this is the footbridge into the fort. So for many years, my friends and I would come to Darnett Island, and it was always a mystery as to who looked after this particular footbridge. Always a mystery, because you need a lot of tools to come out here and build a bridge made out of scaffold board and scaffold poles. And so eventually, one year we came here and there were about 100 Sea Scouts running all over the island, all very excited. And the Scoutmaster told us that it's him that built the bridge, and they maintain it every year. So this handsome chap here, this is Martin. Martin's just over here. Thank you. So
Got my suit on tonight.
So now we move on into the actual fort itself. So this is in the parade ground. So we're in the centre of the Jammy Dodger biscuit. This is the remains of the flagpole, a very, very high flagpole. And then these are the casements, where obviously the guns would be, and the guns would fire out from. And now we're up on the roof. So this is my mate Matt, to give you an idea of scale of the roof going on here. So you've got the stairs down the bottom there. Excuse me. And I think we might need to put the sound back on, if that's okay. So down in the centre of the Jammy Dodger biscuit, you've got the parade ground. Obviously, it's very overgrown. And then around here, you would have had a glass and metal canopy covering over the lower part of the fort to keep the rainwater out, but also to collect the rainwater. So in the highly unlikely situation that the fort became under siege, they would have lots of drinking water. So my friends and I, we decided one year to take an inflatable canoe down to the lower part of the fort to float it around. And I should add that an inflatable canoe and granite, a good marriage do not make. So that's another story. We didn't get a leak until after this little adventure. So we thought, yeah, great idea. Let's go down to the lower level. So there we are, coming through the main entrance. It was a bit hairy because you have to. It's like water displacement. So as you go underneath this rusted portcullis with these big rusted edges, you have to push on the ceiling into the water to get underneath it. So it was a bit hair-raising there. So we went midsummer. And we're in our t-shirts, and some of us are wearing shorts, and it was very nice. But then when we got down to the lower level, we realised that actually it was quite cold because no sunshine gets down there. So it's quite cold. And the other thing was, as we were paddling around, you can't quite see around the corners, so it's quite dark. There's lots of little corners going on. And also when you put your paddle into the water, the ripples are bouncing off the wall in different areas. And the sound is echoing off the casement wall. So it's coming off from all sorts of different angles. And it was actually quite scary. It was actually quite disorientating. So as we came round, you've got the water that's black here, so it's like jet black almost, and you know the water's only that deep, but because you've got this disorientation going on, the weird sounds, where's that coming from, almost like whispering in the walls kind of thing, and it's cold, and it's jet black water, and you think, well, maybe it's deeper, is something going to come out of that water? Absolutely terrifying. So then as we came round to one of the casements, we found this chair, like a 1970s foam chair, and it was floating just above the water. So I took a picture of this chair because it was absolutely terrifying. So this 1970s chair, so it's like side on in this picture, but it was actually at the back. It had its back to us. So as we're paddling past, weird sounds going on, and it's quite cold, and this chair was starting to turn ever so slowly. Absolutely terrifying.
And there was a smouldering cigarette in the ashtray.
Well, no, Clayton, worse than that. Because your imagination is running wild with you, and it's quite cold and dark down there. You think some evil cackling witch that's going to be on this chair. A bit like her. So that's just to wake you up halfway through. Obviously there wasn't an evil cackling witch on there, but it was very scary, and I would not advise you to go down there. Let's get rid of her. I wouldn't advise you to go down there in a canoe, and certainly if you discover a 1970s chair. That's the thing about some of the islands, is you find stuff that makes no sense of why they're there, and you try and think about it, and it just messes your mind up. So, Darnit Island, let's move on. So this is Bishop's Marsh. This is the official name of this particular area of the estuary. 1842. Again, we've got a blank area on the Ordnance Survey map. So there was a fort there before the present one, but there wasn't much left of it, and essentially started building around 1842 because it was an absolute nightmare to build. So we move on. This is a map showing the cement works. So there's cement works on this island. This is where the fort's going to be. And when I first found this map, I thought, why would you have a cement works in the middle of an island in the estuary? Made no sense whatsoever. So then I did a bit more research. There's two reasons. So number one is that in about the 1840s, 1850s, there was a gold rush for really good cement, and eventually we came up with Portland cement. I'm massively oversimplifying this. So one of the key ingredients was clay. And the Medway Estuary is very well known for clay. It's very muddy, and there's this amazing blue clay that you can get. And essentially, they thought that when they were coming up with these amazing formulas for the perfect cement, they thought that the blue clay of Medway was particularly special, and so let's build lots of cement works. And that's what they did. There was like a forest of chimneys that turned up further upriver, but they built the cement works here because you've got a massive supply of clay, almost limitless, for the huge amounts of cement that you need to build for your fort, because you've miscalculated and you need to triple the amount that you need, and it's going to take you nearly 3 times as long as you originally planned. It was an absolute nightmare to build this fort. However, but I would also add that the cement works was here for 10 years, which is roughly the duration of how long it took to build the fort. And the census records tell us that there was a foreman, lived there with his wife and his teenage son. But more interestingly, down here you have a beer house. So there was a pub on this island. There was an actual pub on this island in the middle of the estuary. It predated the fort by a few years, and then whilst the cement works were there and while it was being built, you had lots of labourers coming backwards and forwards. But you also had a huge amount of fishermen that would come past and barge people. So you had Thames barges bringing cement up to London and coming back with rubbish from London. They were going past this particular island, and they would stop off at the beer house and have a pint. It had nefarious activities occurred there. It had a bit of a reputation. When you look at the census records, you can see that the landlord and landlady, throughout the 30 years it was there, they were not married. It was that kind of place. Shocking, absolutely shocking. So essentially, it was also known for Dutch gin traffickers that used to hang out here. And then after the fort was built, it sort of survived for about another year and then disappeared off the maps. One can only assume that if you've got nefarious activities of smuggling going on in your pub and suddenly there's a fort full of soldiers next door, you probably want to relocate your business interests elsewhere. So when I did this presentation to the Rochester Cruising Club, I did it in front of this guy that was there called Dennis. Really nice guy. He's a mudlarker. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with mudlarking. Basically, it's glorified archaeology. So this mudlarker called Dennis, a really lovely guy, and he went to the actual site of the pub. Again, my friends and I, using modern technology and old maps, we went to the actual location of the pub, and this is all that remains. It is essentially it's a muddy shore. There's nothing remains. So when I did this presentation at Rochester Cruising Club, Dennis came to me afterwards and he said, "Right, I've got something to show you." I was like, "Okay, Dennis, let's have a look." So he had these two tankers that he found from the site of the pub. Very excited about that, and I said to Dennis, I said, "Yeah, this is amazing, but how do you know that it came from this pub?" The pub was called the Isle of Beauty, I should add. And so he said, "Well, look, let's shine our mobile phone camera lights on it and we'll have a look." And so here you've got some inscription going on there, and for the benefits of the presentation, I've kind of filled it in a bit with red. So essentially you've got G.E. Norris. So census records tell us that there was a George Ezekiel Norris that was the landlord of the pub. Ezekiel, fantastic Victorian name.
Enough kids called Ezekiel.
Wonderful name, wonderful name. And then down here, you've got Isle of Beauty. So not only is the name of, I didn't know they did this in Victorian times, you had the name of the landlord and you also had the name of the pub, especially a ramshackle pub on a marshy island in the middle of the estuary. So I was very excited about finding this, and I shared this with my friends and they got very excited. And I did say to Dennis, I said, "Can I have them?" And he said no. So, Darnet Island in plans. Beautiful drawings again by the Royal Engineers. This gives you this is a side-on view, so you can see the depth of the concrete that's gone in the foundations, almost as high as the actual fort itself. You've got the Jammy Dodger in the middle, there's a water tank, it's got the flagpole going on there, and then you've got the central part where the parade ground is. So we can take a closer look at that. So I'm showing you a closer look of the parade ground with the canopy, the glass canopy that went around the centre. I'm showing you this picture because the level of detail that the person that's drawn this has gone into. So if you look very closely, you can actually see the shade. They put the shade in as it catches the sun, and then down here, as you can see, no sunlight gets down there. Amazing, beautiful pictures. Not pictures, I should say, the drawings, but you don't get that level of art and detail in modern drawings these days. So that's Darnet Island. Now we go to Birtwick Island. I'm going to zoom in there at some point. There we are, zooming into Birtwick Island. So Birtwick Island is, again, this is taken at low tide, so you've got all the rills, these little squiggles within the salt marshes are known as rills. So Birtwick Island is another example of an island that's been inned, so an embankment round it, freshwater marsh, put sheep on it and make loads of money. So with Birtwick Island you had Stangate Creek here, which was a quarantine zone for on and off for about 200-300 years. Lots of people died there, lots of ships went there as well, but we're going to go to this image. So again, this is an image from it's about 1900. So you've got Birtwick Island down here, you've got Stangate Creek here, and you've got the main River Medway, so Chatham Dockyards down here. Over here is Sheerness Dockyard. Again, you had a couple of forts there as well. So the Admiralty at the time, excuse me while I drink some water.
Can I ask a question?
You may indeed.
So you said that a lot of people died because they were quarantined. So what did they have?
I'll come to that in a bit, Jane. Good question. So with Birtwick Island, the Admiralty at the time, it's about 1890s. They were very concerned about the technology that was happening on the continent to do with torpedo boats. So any half-decent military establishment will always look to history to see what has gone on in the past and how they can make sure that doesn't happen again. So with the Admiralty, what they did was they looked in the past, and you may or may not know, but in 1667, the Dutch fleet sailed up the Medway, sank most of our fleet, and then to really rub it in, they stole our flagship and took it back to the Netherlands and basically just carped on about it for the next 300-400 years. Absolute humiliation. Nationally and locally, but I must add that the good people of Medway We are over it, we just don't like to talk about it. So the Admiralty, conscious of what the Dutch did, they basically realised, and also conscious of the torpedo boats, they essentially built two batteries either side of the main river, North Battery, South Battery, and they put a boom across. And so the idea was that you had torpedo boats that would come down here, they'd hit this boom, and then guns would open up either side and neutralise the enemy. That was the plan. So they built this in about 1898. It was only there for 10 years. Again, a bit like the forts, it was militarily obsolete, but it was within like 4 years it was militarily obsolete. But there's always money for war. So what happened here was, let's go to the next slide here. So Berwick Island there. So this shows you you can't see it where you are probably, but it says Berwick just there. So there was a farmhouse here as well. And then the Admiralty, the War Department came in and they bought this section of the island and then turned that into the garrison for the boom. So we'd have a look at some other pictures here. This gives you an idea of how much erosion has gone on. So this area here was all dug out by these people called the Muddies. So the Muddies were essentially people that worked in the cement trade, and they were digging out the clay to feed the insatiable appetite of the cement trade. And they basically devastated the salt marshes of the Medway, and they took this huge area out here, which you'll see on this picture. And as you can see as well, the flood defences have completely failed, and it's all going back to salt marshes. So in our canoes, we're going down through Stangate Creek. So this is Stangate Creek here, very flat and lovely. Normally, it's quite bouncy, it's quite choppy, and we always call this area the Devil's Dance Floor. It's very, very rarely like this. But what you've got here, this is Stangate Creek here, and then this is the barrack hut, the remains of the barrack hut for the battery, and then you've got a machine gun post just there. Go to the next slide, and this was the kind of like a glorified mini power station, really, that powered the defence electric lights, or searchlights to you and I. Again, this was cutting-edge technology at the time. And so this engine house powered those, and it also powered the boom that was being drawn backwards and forwards. Over here, these nodding donkeys, this is where the North Boom Battery would have been. This is part of Thamesport. So one time we were out on a night paddle, my friends and I, and we'd had a few sherries. And as we came round to this particular point, these cranes, they have like red and white lights at the top. And we came to the conclusion that if you screw your eyes up really, really tight, it looks a little bit like the skyline of Manhattan. It depends how much sherry and beer you've had, honestly. So over here you've got the embankment going on there, so we're going to go and stand on that, and then we're looking back across the marsh. So this is the engine house, obviously the corrugated iron roof has collapsed, and then it gives you an idea, we're at half tide here, and you can see that almost the entire island is underwater. Because it's a salt marsh. But this chimney here, this is ramrod straight. You can put a set square to it now, and it's still true. It's had zero maintenance for over 100 years. It's a testament to Victorian engineering. It's fantastic. So we move on. This is a closer look at the barrack hut. So as you can see, we're canoeing in and out of it at high tide. Also, as you can see, the damp-proof coarse membrane is completely failed. Images of Berwick. So this is a grave of a guy called Sidney Bernard. So I'm showing you this grave. There's lots of reasons why this, but essentially these are railings here, and then you've got the slab down here where the gravestone is. So Sidney Bernard was a surgeon on a ship, the HMS Eclair, that came back from Sierra Leone. They've been doing anti-slavery patrols around Sierra Leone, and basically half the crew came down with yellow fever. Again, I'm massively oversimplifying the situation, but they were ordered to go back to England. They came back. They lost more crew on the way. Sidney Bernard was aboard, and they went to Stangate Creek quarantine zone. So they were ordered to stay there, and Sidney Bernard had the option of getting off the ship with his mates, but he elected to stay on board and look after his brother officers and crewmen. He died, unfortunately, about 2 days later. And then he was buried on Berwick Island. It was quite unusual in itself, because you would have thought that he would have been buried on the mainland or at Dead Man's Island, which is just around the corner. Dead Man's Island, we'll get to that in a bit, but that's where most of the people that died in the quarantine zone were buried. So they buried him on this island. They gave Berwick Island. They gave him like a very nice gravestone. It stood erect. And then over time it fell over because it was being used as a scratching post by cows on the island. So it was lost for a while. There was a changeover of tenant farmers, and it was almost forgotten about. And then there's a guy called surname Shrubsall. He was kind of like a local amateur historian, an ornithologist, and basically he read about Sidney Bernard and said, you know, that he realised this guy was a hero. So he went to Birkbeck Island several times to try and find the gravestone. The farmer at the time didn't know anything about it. So he eventually found it after about 6 goes of going onto the island. He got onto the Admiralty and they said, look, you've got to do something about this. This grave is of a hero. This guy was a hero. You must do something. So I don't quite know what happened, but essentially the Admiralty sent a detachment of sailors. They found the gravestone. They pieced it back together because it'd broken in half, and they laid it flat. And then they put these railings around it so that the grave would be dominant and wouldn't be forgotten about. So the grave was tended by the detachment of Marines from Sheerness Dockyard nearby up until about 1960. And then when the dockyard closed there, it was essentially kind of forgotten about. So over time, the silt started to come in, the flood defences around the island failed, and the tide was coming in, bringing tiny amounts of like mud. And then here, this is taken in 1956, so they've taken this picture, they pushed the mud out of the way. So we fast forward to 2015, and this point here is that point there.
Wow.
So it gives you an idea of how much sediment that's come in. So what's happening here is you've got two things going on. You've got isostatic change. I think that's the correct phrase. So it's basically where the southeast of England is slowly sinking into the sea, very, very slowly. But you've also got sea level rise. So and also the failure of the flood defences. So nature is trying to take it back as a salt marsh. So each time the tide comes in, it brings tiny amounts of mud, and it rises and rises and rises, and then this is roughly about a metre. So friends of mine went back there quite recently, and you almost can't see it. It's almost vanished completely. So that is the grave of Sidney Bernard, known as the loneliest grave in England. And there are people in Sheerness that sometimes go there and they put flowers on the grave. And it's probably because of its remoteness that it is still remembered. So we move on. So this is Stangate Creek. This is a painting called Stangate Creek, and what you've got here, you've got these hulks. So they're not prison hulks. They are called lazarettos. So lazarettos were kind of decommissioned warships, and so where you had ships coming in with all these people that may or may not have had diseases and goods as well, you would put them on these big lazarettos, and hopefully if they didn't die after a month, then they could go back on their ships and carry on their journey. So every ship that was coming into London had to stop here. And at one point, at this busiest time, there were 800 ships rammed into this particular creek. So this picture here, this is by an artist that you may have heard of called J.N.W. Turner. He did the Fighting Tan Maria, and he was all about the light. And this is what's happening in this painting here. You've got the sun going there, and then the light casting across the creek. And these are the supply vessels going out to the lazarettos. So Turner liked this part of the Medway Estuary as well. So, Dead Man's Island. Let's zoom in on Dead Man's Island. There it is. It's basically a flat, featureless marsh. The north side is made of crushed shells, and then you've got this creek going around the back of it called Shepherd's Creek. And I'm going to drink some water again.
Medway water.
I sincerely hope it isn't Medway water. We can edit that bit, Clayton. So essentially what's happening here, let's take another look at some picture of where we are. So there is Dead Man's Island. This is Stangate Creek here. So when it was really busy, 800 ships, it had overflow going around this part of the estuary and then all the way down here as well. It's an absolute nightmare. So basically, people that were dying here, it was easier to bury them sort of out the way a bit so you didn't see what was going on, and so they buried them on Dead Man's Island. You also had, later on, you had hulks, prison hulks that were moored at Sheerness, so you had a horrific death rate on these ships. They're awful places to be, and they were also buried on Dead Man's Island. So as I say, it's a flat, featureless marsh. This is where the North Boom Battery would be, and the Nodding Donkeys. So we'll take a closer look. I'm going to show you some pictures of human remains. So so brace yourselves. So with Dead Man's Island, at low tide, the graves are slowly being washed out. So you have human remains that are exposed at low tide. So we've got some pictures here. So there's a couple of coffins there. And then we've got another coffin here, and you can just about make out some bones there. As I say, people died in horrific circumstances on the hulks and the prison hulks, and also in the quarantine ships. And sometimes they were buried 2 or 3 to an actual coffin. There was a point, I think, in about the 1800s where there was grave markers, like wooden grave markers, and a local fisherman basically stole them and sold them on for firewood. So it was quite shocking, really. But the thing is, about Dead Man's Island, there's two ways of looking at it. One is, oh my God, what an amazing name, Dead Man's Island. It sounds like something out of a pirate kid's story. Let's go there, let's look at the dead bodies, yeah, great. Or the other way of looking at it is a mass grave. And these people died here in horrific circumstances. Most of their relatives would not know that they were here or even be able to find their graves. So it was a very sad, solemn place it's a very sad and solemn place. But you have to accept that there is always an element of human nature that was interested in the macabre. And so people do go out to Dead Man's Island and go and try and find human remains. And these images here, you will not see these again, because each tide it's washing these remains out to sea, and so sometimes there's nothing there, and sometimes there are more coffins as well. So we move on to Dead Man's Island. So my friends and I, quite a few years ago, we were paddling past this island and we were going to Birtwick Island, and we decided to stop at Dead Man's Island. And this is at high tide. As you can see, it's all made of shells, the north part of the beach. And it was really nice. It was actually a really nice day. The water was calm, it was blue, it was flat. We stopped off here for a nice cup of tea, and you could call it confirmation bias, but we were aware of that this was a mass grave, and we were respectful of that. And it was just kind of serene in a weird kind of way. So here's my mate Matt. He's quite happy there, quite a good suntan. And he's looking out over to Grain Power Station here, and you can see the water's blue, beautiful turquoise blue, and then the crushed shells. And it's just nice. It was just a nice place to be. So we had a cup of tea and moved on, and we never returned to Dead Man's Island again. It's owned by Natural England, and it's leased out to a local landowner, and it's owned by Natural England because of the bird life there. There is a lot of very important bird life that needs protecting. So, Court Island. We're nearly there, guys. We're nearly there. So, Court Island. Here we are. We'll zoom in here. You will not see Court Island on any maps. Even locally, most people will not know Court Island because it was me and my mates that came up with the name. So over here you have the German World War I submarine. Let's take a look at some of these pictures here. So an aerial shot there. This is Court Island, very, very small marshy islet. I had some friends of mine that did camp there once, not knowing of the sensitivity of the area, but it was the right time of year. But they camped there, and it was so tiny, it was probably about the size of that bar area. And so you got 4 tents, and you can't even have it was very intimate, should we say. So we move on to some other pictures here. So we're on Court Island. So you've got the German World War I German submarine. German submarine twice. We zoom in on this picture, and then this is the remains of the torpedo tubes, and this is the sharp end of the submarine. This submarine was built towards the end of the First World War, and it didn't really see any particular amazing action. It didn't sink anything. It basically did a patrol of the North Sea and then had to surrender after about 3 months. So nothing exciting happened with this particular submarine. It's called UB122, although there's various theories around the name of the numbering of that submarine. But for the sake of this presentation, it's UB122. And at the end of the First World War, lots of German submarines came in at Harwich. They divvied them up, the Navy divvied them up, and they sent them down to Rochester, or down to Chatham, I should say. And then the local cement factory owner at a place called Halling, which is much further upriver, basically he bought 3 of these submarines. Bought them, cut the conning towers off so they could get underneath Rochester Bridge, took them down to his cement factory and took out the military-grade Siemens engines and put them in his factory. Fantastic, wonderful, wonderful engines. Incidentally, Southend Power Station was powered by German U-boat. Insert joke there, by engines as well. But anyway, so essentially what happened here was, so this guy had 3 submarines left over. When you've had a major global conflict, you have an awful lot of scrap iron on the market. So the bottom of that market fell out and essentially dumped the submarines out on Stoke Marshes. There were quite a few that were dumped out here, and then between the wars they were gradually cut up as the scrap market value came up. They cut them up and took them away, and there were 3 left. So there's 2 that are basically buried in the mud. You can't get to them. There's no point unless it's really low tide and you've got hovercraft. And then there's this one. Luckily for us, this one remained. So Here are some more pictures. So when you've got a canoe, when you're in a canoe and you've got that much water underneath your keel, you can pretty much get in almost anywhere, and that's exactly what my friends did. So this is a withy, so basically a bit of wood that's attached to the top of the submarine. It's not actually part of it, and that's to warn other boaty people that there's an obstruction at high tide. This is a very popular spot for boaty people on the Medway. Loads of people know where the submarine is. Lots of people have been there. And as I say, it's quite well known. There is also the opening credits of a documentary with Jeremy Paxman, and he's rowing a boat in front of the submarine in the mist, and it's like literally like 2 minutes in it. And to get to this point is quite a logistical nightmare because it's very tide sensitive, so you lose water very quickly. You can only sort of be here for maybe maximum of 2 hours, otherwise you run aground. So this picture here is what these guys can see here. So we're up close and personal inside the submarine. This is the gangway in the middle of it. These are the bulkheads or the walls, and then this tiny little area here. We looked at the original plans, and that's actually the salubrious area of where the captain would have slept. And this is what the submarine would have looked like back in its heyday, a massive fighting machine. This isn't the same submarine, but it's the same make and model, and this was washed up on the shore at Hastings in 1919 after being towed by some French tugs. But this gives you an idea of how big this submarine actually was. There were, as I say, it was called UB122, and there were two other submarines that sunk in the mud. No one knows which numbers are associated with which. So you've got UB122, UB126, and UB134. And so no one knows which one is which. But again, my friends and I, we had a few glasses of sherry, and we had some beers, and we came to the conclusion that if there was a UB122 and a UB126 and a UB whatever, then there must have been a UB40. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, so I've banged on about the people that lived on the estuary, I've banged on about the defences that are out on the estuary, and all of that jazz. I'm now going to show you the natural Medway Estuary. It won't take long, don't worry. So this is called golden samphire. It's not much to look at, but golden samphire, it's quite unique. It's almost unique to the area of North Kent. This golden samphire nearly died out. When the dockyard at Chatham closed in 1984, gradually the pollution levels went down and golden samphire started to flourish. And it took about 20, 30 years to get to this stage. We also have sea lavender. So sea lavender, it doesn't smell like lavender, it doesn't look like lavender, but it is purple. And in around about now, actually, there are parts of Darnet Island, and it's like a carpet of purple. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it's something that you only really see if you're really up close or you're actually looking for it. But sea lavender, it grows all over Darnet, and it grows in other places in the estuary, and lots of other muddy creeks along the North Kent coast. Then we also have this. So this is called samphire. So this is an area of Darnet Island to the south, and we call this samphire cut. So you can only see this at low tide. When you go on holiday and you take a photograph of something absolutely amazing, right, and you take a photograph of it and you look at what you've taken a photograph of, and it's like the photo doesn't do that any justice. One of those. And that's what's happening here. So when I took this photograph, this samphire is bottle green, like in the sunshine. Absolutely stunning. Beautiful, beautiful. And this samphire cut is like kind of a channel, as it were. It's probably about the width of this pub and maybe twice the length. Absolutely huge. So we take a closer look at samphire, and this is what it looks like. I'm sure many of you are probably quite familiar with samphire. It's had a bit of a renaissance in the last 20 years. You have it with fish. It can be quite expensive in restaurants and certainly the supermarket. It grows everywhere in the Medway Estuary. You can't move for samphire on some of the islands in late August. My friends really love samphire, and my sister insists that I bring back a few handfuls whenever I've gone out on my canoe. People call it the asparagus of the sea, but I can't stand it. I think it tastes bloody awful. To me, it tastes like really salty celery. It's nothing like asparagus at all. I certainly wouldn't have a poached egg with it. But I am in the minority, luckily. So samphire grows everywhere in the estuary, in the Medway Estuary. Then seals. You have seals in the Medway Estuary. So this is taken by my friend's very long-lensed camera. Essentially, we are probably about nearly half a mile away from these seals. So when you're in a motorboat, like a small boat with an outboard, you can get really close to seals. They're not really bothered. But when you're in a canoe, they will see you from half a mile away. If they're on the shore, they will go straight into the water because they see you as a threat. But these seals, they are in abundance in the estuary. You just have to kind of find them or know where they are. And there's an area near Kingsnorth Power Station, and usually we find about 3 seals that usually hang out in that particular area. And we saw that about 3 consecutive years. And what the seals do is there's always 3s for some strange reason in this particular part of the estuary, and they pop their head up. And they look around, they dive back underneath the canoe, and they come back over the other side. And when they put their head up, you can hear them breathing. And when you can hear them breathing, so it's like a magical moment because these are wild animals, like less than half a mile away from one of the most populous parts of North Kent, certainly in the southeast of England, and very 40 miles from London. These wild animals, these wonderful seals that you see. But they only pop their head up for like maybe 2-3 seconds if you're lucky. So to get these pictures, we took a lot of pictures of empty water. But it's amazing because they're wild animals. What else have we got? So we're nearly at the end, guys. I think we need some sound as well, please, Clayton. So this picture is taken near Burnwick Island. So this is taken at Stangate Creek, where you saw the Turner painting. And this was an amazing cloud formation that occurred. So the thing about being in the estuary is that there's no trees, there's barely any hills, and the skies are huge. Big skies. And so you can see for miles, if you're a sailor or do sailing, you know that anyway, but this is what happens on the estuary. So this cloud formation occurred after like some showers had happened, and it spread from one side of the estuary all the way over to the other. It was absolutely amazing. And like a sunset or a sunrise, it only lasted maybe 10 minutes at the top. But it was a wonderful thing to see. And as you can see, the way the light hits the clouds, and this is what Turner was all about. It was all about the lights and the North Kent coast. And so we were very lucky to see this. So the last thing I'll leave you with the estuary is the bird life. I could do a presentation about birds, but I'm not going to. But the bird life is very important in the Medway Estuary. It's like Heathrow Airport for birds. So there's always a bird flying in from somewhere in the world and a bird flying off to somewhere else in the world. It's absolutely amazing. And the least impactful time, as I say, is sort of late August, early September. There's what's the really famous bird?
Terns.
No, the other one. No.
Seagulls.
No. This is so embarrassing.
Come on, everybody, help me.
Oyster catcher. Who said oyster catcher? Who said oyster catcher?
I did.
Oh, thank you. Lucky there. Crikey, I think I styled that one out there. Oyster catchers. Oyster catcher, the sound of the oyster catcher, to us, to my friends who go canoeing out there, it is like the soundtrack to the Medway Estuary. They are quite screechy. But whenever we hear the oyster catcher elsewhere by the seaside, for example, always brings us straight back to the estuary in our minds. So I'm going to play some bird song to you of the Medway Estuary, just to give you an idea of what's out there. So the real squeaky cheep, that's the oyster catcher. And the oyster catcher is not happy because we are near its nest. So if you hear that, then you need to back off. I would add that oyster catchers are very spacious. So we're quite a distance from their nest anyway. You've got red shanks going on in the background there and various other birds. So that gives you an idea. This is the soundtrack of the Medway Estuary to many ways. Thank you very much for listening. So, before I have a pint with my mates, does anyone have... Yes, handsome man over there, do you have a question?
Why? Why have you had a 15-year adventure to explore the Medway and these forts and do the research and the archives and learn about what the different bird sounds are? What was the original, you know what, let's get some canoes and let's go on the river? Where did that come from? What was the genesis of your adventure?
That's a very good question. I always wanted a canoe, like from very young age.
You're from that area?
From Kent area. I always wanted a canoe, got one, and then I went on the River Stour near Canterbury, very, very pretty, very lovely. And then I saw an article in a local newspaper, I should say, and this guy called Dave Wise, he was running this kind of arts thing where it was called Discover Your Estuary. So he had a canoe, and it's basically loads of canoes turned up, and he showed us Darnett Island. And the very idea of going on open water like that was absolutely terrifying. I just, no, I'm not doing that. But he showed us that actually, don't be frightened, you can do this. So we went out to Darnett Island, and it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like
no one else is here. We're here, but no one else is here.
There was about 20 people with us at the time. But yeah, it was the remoteness as well of the island. But surprisingly, Darnett Island, as I say, it's the only one that's owned by a private individual. He's kind of happy for people to go there as long as you ask for permission. But it's quite a popular island, surprisingly so. Like in the summer, it does get quite busy. I don't know if you guys have heard of geocaching at all before. Yeah. So for those that don't know geocaching, basically it's like a bit of tat, plastic bit of tat from a Christmas cracker, and you hide it somewhere, and you have like a treasure clues to find it. And on Darnett Island, there's hundreds of them. It's insane how many there are. And one time we were on the island, and 3 boats came in, like motorboards, and like about 5 or 6 people jumped out, most of them kids. And it's like, oh, hi, how are you doing? Oh, you're here on the island. Not interested in the slightest. They just carried on, went to the fort, found their bit of tat, ticked a box, and then went. But in answer to your question, why? It was because an inspirational guy called Dave Wise showed us the estuary. He lived on Darnett Island for about 40 days, something like that. 6 weeks. He was between the boats, shall we say? But he did a YouTube film. It's about an hour long, and I'd recommend anyone watch it. It's called 45 Days on the Isle of Beauty, something like that. Dave Wise, Isle of Beauty. If you look it up, it's a great video. It's all about like him being there and what he feels about it and everything. So he captures the estuary. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I'm always interested in why people start their adventures.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah, excellent. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I'm afraid it's me again.
Yes, Jane.
Because I want to know what people died of on that island. Dead man. So what were the diseases?
So the diseases were good question. Thank you. So the diseases on the lazarettos and in the quarantine zone and on the convict ships tend to be yellow fever. Was it yellow fever? It was yellow fever.
There was a lot of yellow fever that came over from when they were doing their slave, patrols. They would catch yellow fever and they came over with it.
Yeah, and you also had like cholera as well. So cholera is like really awful conditions, and so sometimes in the bottom of the ships you had like the mosquitoes would live there and they would carry the yellow fever, and dysentery as well. I mean, awful diseases. A lot of them preventable. It was just the conditions they were in. So where you had like the lazarettos with the ships, the hulks where they would put quarantine people, they also took goods off of ships, because they didn't understand like medicine and didn't understand germs, I should say. So they just thought if we air it, then the evilness will somehow dissipate from in the air. And so they were doing that. They didn't fully understand what the diseases meant. So that's mostly what they know. Yellow fever was a big one, and say cholera.
Lazaretto suggests leprosy, though.
Yeah, indeed. Lazaretto, because Lazaretto actually comes from the Italian word. I think there's an island in Venice that's called Lazaretto or something like that. And
it's exactly the same under the mental islands. Called Poveglia is not actually. It belongs to the government, and you can ask a license to visit, and it's a massive area. It's used at the moment for osteoarchaeology studies.
Excellent, thank you, yeah. So, sorry Clayton, what was your question again?
I was just saying that the name Lazaretto suggests leprosy.
Yeah. So
maybe it's a generic term.
A lot of the time it was referred to as that. But Lazaretto, I think it comes from Lazarus, like the person that lives again. But there was a leper colony that was going to be built in Stangate Creek, and they were going to spend huge amounts of money on it. Beautiful plans in the National Archives, but they realised that actually building a leprosy colony in a salt marsh where there were mosquitoes wasn't actually good for them. So they abandoned that idea. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, gentleman at the front.
Are you a man of Kent or a Kentish man?
I am a man of Kent. Can you not tell? So, you're a man of Kent.
No, I'm out of North London.
Okay. It's a trendy part of
So-
London. I like that. Yeah.
So these forts now, I mean, obviously they're gradually being taken over by nature. What do you think their future is?
That's a really good question. Thank you. Yeah. So the future of the forts, they are scheduled ancient monuments. They're not actually ancient monuments. That's just the designation they've got. And the problem with these particular forts is because so many of them were built at the same time, maintaining them, it's only something the state can do, or a billionaire or a millionaire. So there's two forts. It's a Spithead Fort, I think it is, and there's two round forts, amazing buildings in the sea at Portsmouth, and they've both been turned into like hotels. And the people that have run that, they've had difficulties running that anyway. So it's like the luxury market, but also it's a bit of a ball ache to get out there.
So notes Clayton for the nut house.
So there's a fort in the entrance to the Medway opposite Sheerness Fort, and it's called Grain Tower. Google it. It's a fantastic, amazing building. It sits in the river. Amazing bit of engineering, and it was being sold. But this guy bought it and sold it as #1 the Thames, even though it wasn't actually in the Thames. It was just inside the Medway. And through the day job, I actually spoke to the owner and I said to him, #1 the Thames, you're selling it for like £500,000. Why did you buy it? And he was like, well, actually, they want to build an airport and I want to sell it so I can get the compensation for it. So the airport didn't get built, but he did sell it on. But in answer to your question, in a roundabout way, is essentially the future of those forts is this salt marsh, particularly at Darnett, the smaller island, is gradually being eroded. And so eventually, probably in about the next 20 years, the salt marsh is going to be gone and the fort will just sit in the water, like on its like kind of glorified concrete disc, as it were. So, but that will take time for that to happen. There are efforts to protect the salt marshes that are being worked on at the moment. So the idea is now we're starting to discover how important salt marshes are as a carbon sink, and also to reduce wave energy, and also to suck up CO2 as well. We're only really discovering that in the last 10 years. So there are efforts to actually protect the salt marshes using dredging sediment from Sheerness Port. But the efforts to do that, the legislation is insane. It takes 5 years just to get a licence. It's horrendous. But yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Lovely, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Marvellous, thank you.